All right. See, everything's slower without my lovely co-pilot. All right. So we keep with these gnosis of being human. Again, gnosis of gnosis, being human is gnosis. We keep opening with this particular quintessential Gnostic psychology quote, that Gnostic psychology differs fundamentally from conventional psychology because it approaches the human being or the human psyche from the point of origin, the essence, essentially what we are, our essential nature, the Buddhata or the consciousness, the seed of the soul, divine intelligent principles which belong neither to time nor to the mind. Again, that hu mon, that mind, that manas belongs to the hu, to the spirit. And to always seek to be connected with that. And we could say if we really just dove into a deep practice on that, what it is to be human, a spirit mind, that would be the class on awakening consciousness. That would be it. If we really just are able to recognize what we are as an essence, as that seed of soul, that essential nature, the essence with its consciousness as its faculty of perception, not the thinking mind as the primary faculty of perception. That's not a faculty of perception. That's an elaboration. The thinking mind, the intellectual mind, is that aspect of the mind that elaborates, that compares, that thinks around things in its useful, in its use, it's useful in its orbit. But it's not a faculty of actual perception. That the thoughts, the thinking mind, are meant to then take what we perceive with the consciousness, and in moments when it's useful, do a comparison or an analysis or hypothesize, what if, and then leave the thinking and go experience the answer. The answer never comes from thinking. The answer, a real answer, a conscious answer, doesn't come from that. So it does not belong to the mind, does not belong to time. So this essence, that is what we really are, and her faculty of perception, that is the consciousness, is what we're really interested in. Always, but definitely right now, this is what we're fundamentally interested in exploring. And Nona, you probably know the great poet Hafiz, the Persian poet Hafiz, who I think says it beautifully, that God revealed a sublime truth to the world when God sang, "I am made whole by your life. Each soul completes me." And Hafiz is so great at telling us not only what we are, but where we are. This context of where we are in relation to that who, that spirit, as a manas, a mind that includes the non-thinking mind, and that we complete the story or the matter or the fiber of what God is, of divinity. Each soul completes. And so in that, we are all siblings. We're all siblings because we're all children together. The complete poem by Hafiz, "Each soul completes me," is my beloved, and in Persian poetry, often beloved is capitalized, that who, the spirit. "My beloved said, my name is not complete without yours." I thought, how could a human's worth ever be such? And God, knowing all our thoughts, and all our thoughts are innocent steps on the path, then addressed my heart. God revealed a sublime truth to the world when he sang, "I am made whole by your life. Each soul completes me." So poetry like this is another way of getting in contact with or beginning to understand what it is to be human, because poetry such as this, not all poetry, but poetry such as this serves to take us out of the mind. It really puts us in different parts of the mind, non-thinking parts of the mind, more imaginative parts of the mind. And poetry that is, we could say, solar or about the soul, then especially helps us to feel ourselves as human, or have an opportunity to perceive in a different way. So Hafiz, the great Persian poet Hafiz, is wonderful for helping us to get in touch with our essence and make connection with what it is to be human. By the way, Love Poems from God, a wonderful, wonderful collection of poetry, prose like this. One of my favorite books. If you have that question, if you're going to be stranded on an island for a while, which books would you take? This is definitely on my short list. Love Poems from God. So we need to create opportunities for the consciousness to be touched. Because certainly the consciousness is muffled in a lot of ways. There's a lot that's going on, a lot of impressions, a lot of heavy impressions, a lot of impressions that are not very welcoming to the subtle consciousness in life. And we need to create opportunities for that subtle consciousness, that perception of our essence, the faculty of perception that the essence has, to be allowed to be, to have space to be, and to be invited into our daily life. We have to create this. And this is why we meditate. This is why we pray. This is why we mantralize. This is why we would read poetry like that. This is why a silent walk is a wonderful thing to do for the essence, to take moments to allow our more subtle nature to have an opportunity to be in our lives, to be active in our lives. So that is a necessary part of an awakening consciousness, because it doesn't just happen. And we'll talk more about that, and even talk about, well, why doesn't it just happen? Why aren't we all just awake? Why is that? I'm not going to answer that right now. There's a lot to say about that. We will, but it's a question. It's a question for all of us to ask ourselves. So there's a wonderful book by the Gnostic master Samael and Bior, Fundamental Education. And the very last chapter of many chapters of that not so huge book is called Consciousness. So the culmination of that book is consciousness, is the awakening of consciousness. And within that chapter, Samael says that within a human being, the consciousness is a very particular means of apprehending internal knowledge, and is completely independent of any mental activity. Wow, I wonder how that strikes you? Completely independent of any mental activity? A means of apprehending internal knowledge, completely independent of mental activity? How do we make sense of that? And more importantly, how do we make sense of it beyond mental activity, beyond it being an idea? How do we make sense of that? And the only way to make sense of that is to cultivate inner silence, to work on developing inner silence, to develop a mind that at least has some moments completely independent of mental activity, independent of thought. And only then can we really, do we become in any way qualified to talk about the consciousness at all. So there's lots of, there's maybe lots of ideas about the consciousness, but I'm not interested in any idea about the consciousness from someone who does not cultivate internal silence. because they can't know what the consciousness is from only a place of mental activity. Because the consciousness is a means of apprehension apart from that. So who'd be willing to read the next quote? Who has good audio and would be up for reading this next quote? Come off mute if you're willing to read. It's just the next quote to get another voice in here. Also from Fundamental Education, same chapter. Arturo, I see you leaning, and in the Zoomiverse, leaning forward to me usually means you're coming off mute. Are you coming off mute?
The question is if I want to read.
Sure, yeah. Would you be willing to read the second quote?
Okay. Maybe my English is not good, but I'm gonna try.
Okay, thank you.
Those who confuse the consciousness with psychological functions, thoughts, feelings, motor impulses, and sensations are indeed very unconscious. They are profoundly asleep.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, so oftentimes, I mean, this is our common experience in life, that we have these functions, we have these thoughts, we have these feelings. Sometimes we call sensations feelings or emotions feelings. We have these impulses. But those are not the consciousness. Those are experiences that the consciousness can observe and witness and be aware of. But those in and of themselves are not the consciousness. The consciousness is the perceiver, the perception itself. So that which witnesses. So in other traditions might be called the watcher, the seer, right? In a way, a spy of life. Well, I'll mention it a little bit. The philosopher Diogenes, who was asked by a great ruler of his time, "Are you a spy?" Because he was a very controversial figure, Diogenes, for anyone who's heard of him. And his answer to this leader, who was a great conqueror, the father of Alexander the Great, and who was seeking to take over, which then his son took over and fulfilled. And Diogenes answered this king, "Yes, I'm a spy of your lack of wisdom and your willingness to gamble everything of your country and your own for your desires." So that's the kind of watcher, the kind of spy that someone with a more awake consciousness is, that watcher. And so we want to observe and be aware of our feelings, our impulses, our thoughts, without becoming them. And that is what it is to be conscious, awake, aware, to never exit the seat of that watcher, that witness, that consciousness, and to be a full participant in all those, the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations, the impulses, the conversation, to be a participant in life, but without losing ourselves as an essence, without becoming submerged and underneath all those experiences, to mistake myself as my sensations, to mistake myself as my thoughts, as my feelings. That's what we want to watch. Also in the same chapter on consciousness, and obviously we recommend the book Fundamental Education by Samael and Bior, and particularly this chapter, well, all of them really, because they all lead up to this chapter. But he also says that it's essential to know that the consciousness within what in Gnosis we call a rational animal, so somebody who's lost touch with their who, their spirit, their humanness, so that the consciousness within them is not continuous, it's not permanent, it's not consistent. He says that normally the consciousness sleeps very profoundly. he says that indeed intellectual animals work, drive, marry, die, and so on with the consciousness asleep, only perhaps awakening in some exceptional moments. Recently, I was driving with my granddaughter and we were going down, one of those, like, we weren't on the freeway, but on one of those side streets where, tend to drive a little bit swiftly and everybody trusts we're all paying attention. Well, somebody wasn't paying attention and they just start like coming over into our lane. And I had one of those moments, this was just a couple of weeks ago, where time completely changed. And I was so suddenly perceptive that it's like the aperture of my awareness bumped out and everything was happening in slow motion. I was really noticing everything. And luckily, my body responded effectively and quickly, of course, had I waited for my brain, we would have had a car accident, without the thinking mind, that awareness and reactivity took over. But it's interesting to have those moments, right? When time slows down. Now, it doesn't have to be a near car accident. It can be a beautiful sunset or a mountaintop view. Sometimes when you've taken a long hike and you come around the corner and that vista is so wonderful that they say it takes your breath away. It can also give you breath, right? But it takes your breath away in that moment and time stands still. And we have those exceptional moments of awakening that thankfully life brings us. And those experiences that we have give us a taste of what is it to be awake. And it gives us a taste of what is said here, that the consciousness does not belong to time, nor the mind. And think about it, those moments we've had, like I said, the everything slowed down, or that vista and time stops. Consciousness isn't trapped in time. Time changes when we're more conscious. And people commonly, they talk about, go on vacation and step out of the busy, very time-regulated type of life. And it feels like one day is like 3 days. Time slowed down because the mind slowed down. The mind and time have a direct relationship. Our perception of time and our quality, or the use we are making of our mind, go hand in hand. Choppy, fast, constantly thinking mind, then we experience time as choppy, fast, and passing quickly. And you notice how as people age and we tend to take on more of that choppy, nonstop sort of time regulated way of living, people as they age tend to report, the years just fly. I don't know where last year went. It just feels like time goes so fast when the mind does not have rest and peace, because the mind and time go hand in hand, our perception. So when we are able to step out of the mind and be the seer of the mind, of that mind, it completely changes our sense of time. And so how do we, unless we can afford to always be on vacation, like, how do we do this? How do we do this? Because even then, if it was just constant vacation, we tend to get lazy, right? There's plenty of examples that show us that, how that kind of lifestyle can not necessarily lead to more consciousness. So the question is, how do we invite more of that vacation mind and that looking at a vista mind and that pure aware mind into our daily life, into our lives? That's the question. And one of the answers is create those moments throughout our day. Don't wait for the near car accident on the road. Don't wait until you're going hiking in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 2 months or whatever it is. How do we invite more of that vista and slowing down time into our everyday life? That's the question. And one answer is to meditate. That is a practice, a time that we purposefully set aside. And we also need to not just make it when we meditate, to not just reserve it for, oh, tonight, I'll be conscious in that half hour I set aside later, but also to invite those moments into how we do what we do, into how we work, into how we shop, into how we talk, into how we interact, into how we eat. To invite those moments, we've got to have those that aspect of awakening happening at all times. Otherwise, it's very easy to have that on-off relationship with consciousness. So awakening consciousness needs to be in our awareness all the time. Because again, those distractions and that, call to live that lifestyle of very time-regulated, choppy, always thinking, and more abrasive kind of use of the mind is always there for us. Life is asking a lot of us. Usually, life is asking a lot of us. So we can verify all of this simply by observing our intimate thoughts, our feelings, the triggers of our many actions. So one thing that's important to do to awaken consciousness is, yes, to create this spaciousness, this space within our everyday life, but also to observe ourselves, to turn that seeing into ourselves, to see, well, yeah, if I find myself distracted and out of the seat of awareness, where did I go? What impulsed me to go there? What pushed me out of the seat when I wasn't aware of myself? What's driving me to this distraction? What's driving me into these feelings of stress? What's driving me to think 100 times about one thing? What's driving the statistic that says that about 95% of people's thoughts are repeats from the day before? What's driving that amount of repetitive thinking that's not really getting to more clarity or solutions? What's driving that? We have to turn the light on inside. We have to turn that seeing on inside and observe ourselves, witness ourselves. The key is not from the mind. So for instance, vanity, the ego, and the mind in a state of vanity, and that kind of vain self-consciousness likes to think of itself as a self-observer. And it is, it's an observer, but with a particular goal, with the goals of vanity. It has an egoical agenda. So we have to be even watchful of that. Who's observing? Do I want to be a good spiritual person? Do I want to seem a certain way? Do I want to avoid embarrassment? Do I want to be perceived as doing the right thing? Do I want to feel like I am right in my pride? Because those are observers too. Pride and vanity, envy, these are all observers of sorts. Obviously not the observer that we're talking about, not the consciousness. And so we've got to, really watch. The mind is used to, the mind apart from who, so the rational mammal mind is used to being active, is used to the one being in charge of our state and our mind and what we're doing. And many of us, for so long, most of us we've kind of given permission to that kind of mind to run our lives. And so it's difficult to have trust and faith in the consciousness. And think about it, the nature of trust and developing faith, developing trust, we all know, like if you've ever decided to trust someone, it's an act of trusting. Like we have to be willing to be vulnerable in order to develop that trust. If there's never that step of, I'm willing to be vulnerable, let's see what happens, let's trust, then I will never have trust. And so the trusting the consciousness is like this. Can I trust my consciousness instead of my mind grabbing a bunch of memories to compare this moment to and analyze it from the stale past? Can I trust the consciousness to be present in this situation? It's an act of vulnerability. It's an act of trust, but only then do we develop trust and faith and more reliance in the consciousness. Indeed, it is vulnerable, and that's what we have to do. If we're going to awaken consciousness, we've got to be willing to trust the consciousness, to trust our essential selves in that way, and to stop putting our trust and faith in the mind that is just manas separated from who, that not quite human mind. And we've given a lot of authority to that kind of mind. And I mean, our social systems are almost, if not entirely, run by that rational animal mind. And so it's pretty unknown, untrusted, unpopular, relatively unsupported to actually operate from a human perspective, from a humanus. In fact, it seems crazy. And that's what the poets like Hafiz came to celebrate, that madness of being human, of actually coming from the consciousness, has become madness in this world. And next time we'll talk about this more. We'll talk more about next time about the subconsciousness and how this dualistic state of the consciousness, what happened, because Gnosis teaches a very long history of humanity, much longer than what is commonly taught. And so previous humanities like that of Atlantis, that of Lemuria, and even previous to that, can teach us a lot about how we've come to be the way that we are now and what we're recapitulating. So it was in a past humanity when the dualistic state of the consciousness developed. And it can, okay, so that might sound really far out, but we can make sense of it ourselves. And that, why would we need a subconsciousness? Why not just consciousness? Well, what are we to do with our internal contradictions? We got to put them somewhere. Where does the shadow go? You know, if I say one thing and do another, what do I do with that contradiction? Thoughts, feelings, sensations are all forms of matter. All matter is energy. And thoughts, feelings, and sensations are forms of energy. They are therefore subtle matter. We have to literally put them somewhere. And so if I have secret thoughts, secret motivations, secret impulses that contradict how I show up and how I want to show up, I've got to put them somewhere. And that somewhere became our own shadow, the subconsciousness, which dualized our consciousness. And the subconsciousness got very populated. The shadow became very big. It's interesting, like, how's it even possible to have a shadow bigger than oneself? But it's kind of how it's become. And so in this work, we have a couple of prime reasons why we meditate. First is to know who we are, what we are, to be in touch with ourselves as an essence, to experience being the essence connected with its who, its spirit, its being. That's principle, we could say, first and foremost, why it's important to meditate. And along with that, create those states of spaciousness, those states of beingness, those states in which we get to be the essence, perceiving with our consciousness. The other primary reason that we meditate then is to utilize that functioning of the essence, that consciousness of the essence, in order to see the shadow, to go into our own subconsciousness and make it conscious. Because until we do that work, that depth work, that depth psychology work that requires meditation, we will always be in contradiction. We will always live a lie. And so much of our life will be in self-contradiction, and therefore a state of lying, which has very painful consequences for ourselves, intimately, personally, but for everyone, interdependently. And that is why we have the pain and the misery in the world that we do. That is why. And people, even our invitation group a few nights ago, we have a couple of invitation level groups for people who stay and keep studying and practicing. One gentleman, he was reflecting on what we were studying and still vexed with that question that we all are vexed with. It's like, why so much pain? Why so much misery in the world if what we really are is consciousness? And it's because we are given free will. And so we've been given that ability, that freedom to create this shadow. Each person has a vast shadow, has a vast subconsciousness that even we divide into subconscious, unconscious, subconscious, and infraconscious. There's even like levels to understand, or Dante's Inferno, going into, it's not just some other place, he was going into himself. That's how he knew so much about it. It was himself. And so you multiply that by nearly 8 billion people. And this world has a heavy shadow. And only through this work of like dropping in, like the anchor dropping into that dark ocean and going in, but anchored, that solid, strong anchor of a consciousness that's been cultivated, going into the depth of ourselves, to land on the floor and be there and see what's there. I don't know if you've ever been scuba diving. It's magical. It's really amazing. And you're just there with your breath floating, into this other world. It's otherworldly. So we go into our own dark ocean and we see what's there to bring it to light. That's the hero's journey. If you want to be heroic, that's what you need to do. If you want to achieve something amazing with your life, learn how to go into your shadow and bring it to light. And you will do the most important thing a human being can do with their life, which is to become conscious and literally alleviate suffering from the world. And this is the way to do it. Staying on the surface and shuffling, this politician for that one, and this philosophy for that one, and this ideology for that one, and arguing about our ideas, this is not going below the surface, and it will not create fundamental change, and it will not alleviate suffering. It will just make us feel like we're doing something in that time constricted way of mental life of the rational animal. So Gnosis is radical activism. And this week, I think I especially feel compelled to maybe say this, because I was talking with someone who decided to stop coming to classes the other day. And they said, well, I just really feel like I need to take what what I've learned into life, and with all respect, absolute respect, yes, do that. But my hope is like, please don't forget the teachings about how to go into your own shadow and remove that suffering from the world. So while we're volunteering, while we're doing for others, to go within and take radical responsibility for the suffering that we cause ourselves and others, the lies that we tell, the contradictions. I'll share a personal example that yesterday was, my granddaughter has had this summer camp of doing a play, putting on a play, and the kids got together. And so every day they made it from scratch, their own scripting, making their own props, the whole thing. And yesterday was the performance in the middle of the day, which happened to be the middle of a work day for me. And I was 8 minutes late and they went first, and I missed her play. I got there at the very end, and she was sad and I was sad about that. And luckily the grandma was there and her dad. And so last night in meditation, I reflected on what happened there, and I know how it is, the others were like, oh, it's okay, you did your best. But I knew it's like, that was a moment that was important. And I did not place the proper importance to it in how I organized my day. And sometimes just 8 minutes really matters. And so I took it into meditation, and I, went as far as my anchor could go in that time last night. And I saw, I uncovered, it's like the self-importance, the self-sympathy that justified, there's like a pre-justifying when I notice when I'm doing something that's out of sync, that's out of integrity, whether it's actually thought out or just felt, there's some subtle like justifying happening in the moment. And so I looked at that and I felt a real remorse. I felt like a conscious remorse. And this is what we need to do. This is productive. People who either don't have the skill or the support, the training, the awareness, the knowledge of how to go into the shadow, how to sustain being with conscious remorse, they get stuck in shame, they get stuck in fear, they get stuck in guilt and spin and spin. And that's a way to not change. Also, people who just, they're resistant to changing. They don't want to change something. And so we don't make me feel bad, or I just feel really bad. And we can get caught in that. And that's not what conscious remorse is. Conscious remorse is to take intimate, deep ownership for our contradictions, and to then make an intimate personal commitment to be aware of that before and as it's happening in the future, so that it doesn't keep happening. And so so that kind of conscious awareness, that kind of conscious remorse going into our own shadow is incredibly important, that we're able to do that work. And that's what we learned. So that's second reason to meditate is to be able to drop in and to actually change, to actually produce awakeness, consciousness of ourselves. So in Gnosis, when we talk about self-consciousness, we don't mean that vain self-consciousness of the ego, of vanity, trying to observe and control myself all the time. We're talking about the authentic self-consciousness of ourselves and consciousness of what we really are. And to live that way, and when we're not, to recognize it and to really be interested to get back to consciousness. Diogenes, a Greek philosopher who was known for carrying around town a lantern. He said, putting it in the face of the citizens of Athens, searching for an honest person. That was Diogenes. A very interesting figure who lived as this artist is depicting, or something like this, who advocated complete truthfulness at all times. So again, the face we need to put the lantern in is our own face. Maybe, I don't know really, maybe Diogenes had a right to put it in other people's face, but if he did, it was only because he was always putting it in his own face. And we've got to turn that light interiorly to really see ourselves in an honest way, and to be very honest, because only then can we become free from that which imprisons us, our fear, our contradictions, our self-sufficiency, our self-justifications, our vanity, our pride, all of that and more. By the way, for anybody with kids or kids in your lives, there's a great children's book, Diogenes the dog, who wants to become his own master and buries his collar in his leash and then goes to Athens to be a philosopher dog. It's a pretty great book. So finally, in that chapter on consciousness, Master Samael, towards the end of that chapter, says, if we want to awaken the consciousness, we need to start examining, studying, and thereafter eliminating all those obstacles that appear on the path. He says, in this book, we have taught the path for awakening of consciousness, starting from the very school desk. So that book, Fundamental Education, is often seen as being appropriate for teachers and school kids, and a lot of it's directed as if that, but it's really a book that's teaching us as an essence. It's a re-education of ourselves as an essence on how to bring the consciousness into life, into our lives as it is, to be that cross in motion, as we've talked about in the recent previous talks. And in those recent previous talks, we've talked about who are we, the spark of divinity, the essence, seeking to know itself through creation, through life, an essence who has lost consciousness of why it's here, resulting in this false personality, false identity, all this thinking that we make up in that vacuum of not knowing who we really are. And that why we are here is to embody divinity on earth. And then of what are we? We've talked about having 3 brains, 7 centers. We'll show a glyph of this in a moment. But those 3 brains of the intellectual brain, the emotional brain, and the brain of action. And where are we? Well, we said a lot about that last month, but fundamentally the question to always ask ourselves is, am I here? Am I here and now as a consciousness present? Am I in the past? Am I in the future? Am I distracted? Or am I here and now present? And you can, find an anchor, that anchor that's able to go in and stay in spite of whatever comes up. You can anchor yourself in your breathing at all times. It's a wonderful, blessed tool that we have. So long as we're living, we've got that. We've got that anchor. Mm-hmm. And our consciousness is awake to the degree that the essence is aware of itself and active. Otherwise, we are asleep. When the consciousness is not active, aware, present here and now. And usually the essence is asleep. It's conditioned, distracted, identified. Let's give it a go right now. Let's simply choose to be 100% present in that anchor of breathing, choosing not to have a single thought for this period of silence starting now. So that was about 20 seconds or so. We can just notice for ourselves, can I choose to stay purely present? Can I choose to not think? Can I choose to just be aware only of my breath? And by even doing little 20-second practices like that throughout the day, we increase our capacity of that choice. So that wasn't a pass-fail test. I had a thought in terms of how is this going for them? Of course. But it's to notice that about ourselves and begin to recognize, verify what these teachings are saying through self-observation. Let it be a hypothesis. These teachings are just theory until we go witness it for ourselves, until we go and practice for ourselves. And why bother when the conscious is sleeping? It's so common, it's so easy, everybody's doing it and can even feel enjoyable. We hear this often where people, we hear like, oh, trying to be awake all the time. I just want to break from that. It can feel hard when we're not soft in our approach. And the consciousness is something actually subtle, which is why it's so easy to let it go. But, as we are asleep, we're living a life projected from our subconsciousness that I was talking about a moment ago. And we're living a dream that's a projection of our unconscious, subconscious, and even infraconsciousness. A lot of awful movies are just a projection of the creator's infra consciousness, and it serves to stimulate the infra consciousness of others. And so eventually that dream becomes some kind of nightmare if we don't wake up. And the nightmare might just be apathy, the nightmare of a life of spiritual apathy, the nightmare of a life of lack of genuine inspiration, of feeling the soul, and that kind of freedom. Compared to the consciousness, that's a type of nightmare. And as we awaken, we emerge from that dreaming and we contact actual reality, the liberation. We're not going to talk about that right now. We're going to keep moving. So 7 centers and 3 brains, right? So the motor, instinctive, sexual, those 3 centers comprise 1 brain of action. And so these 3 brains are made up of 5 centers: the intellect, the emotion, the motor, instinctive, and sexual. And then the additional 2 on the other side are the superior intellectual and the superior emotional that we talked about a lot in the previous couple of meetings. I'm not going to talk about so much now, but the non-thinking mind and the intuitive emotion. What's important about this in this topic of awakening consciousness is that if you haven't observed it yet for yourself, this is the hypothesis, this is the Gnostic hypothesis that we're proposing, that you rely or tend to operate within and from one of these 3 brains more than the other 2. Take that as a hypothesis to go forth and investigate over this next month until we meet again on the 3rd Saturday of next month to continue this topic. That people tend to be either primarily intellectual, primarily emotional, or primarily instinctive and action-based. So that's the hypothesis. And that's valuable information for those who want to awaken. If you don't want to awaken, none of this is very valuable information. But if you want to awaken your consciousness, this is valuable information to know how are you unbalanced as you are seeking balance and congruousness. Mm-hmm. So take it as a hypothesis. We'll talk about it more next month. We talked about last time, and of course, as we're talking about now in relation to awakening consciousness, it's relevant again, the 4 fundamental states of consciousness. objective, totally awake consciousness, that of a Christ, of a Buddha. Awake or awakened, free, not trapped by desires and distractions and non-presence, so free, and directed by the consciousness, instead of directed by envy, directed by shame, directed by pride. There's a lot of internal directors we have from the ego. We want the director of this awake, present, free, undistracted consciousness to be the essence. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're really interested in, is what's called this third state of consciousness. The second state of consciousness is that common state of the consciousness being asleep, subjective, conditioned consciousness, conditioned by our desires, conditioned by my mood, my attitude, conditioned by this opinion that I have, conditioned by what I think others think of me, conditioned by I'm too hot, I'm too cold, lots of conditions that we allow the consciousness to be trapped by. Again, the consciousness being our perception of awareness. And then that lowest state of consciousness that we've talked about, the unconsciousness, the subconsciousness, even the infraconsciousness. We're interested in that awake, free, directed consciousness. Very interested in that. And we've talked about before, the essence is that part of divinity that we truly are, that descends into matter, that descends into life to experience and know more of creation. Again, each soul completes me. And that begins with that spark of divinity coming into matter to reflect back to God its own perception, its own comprehension, its own light. So that spirit in matter, that humanus, that we are, and we are always at the cross, always at the center of this cross of spirit and matter. And of course, in these studies, we learn, we grow knowledge, experience in taking that wisdom back to spirit, because each soul completes him, every one of us. So we seek to do that. And so every human being, we have an incredible choice to make with our life, to be aware of this cross in all moments, to be aware that I, as a soul, am here to complete him, to be aware of that or not, to be or to only exist, and to find beingness in our existence. That is what it is to awaken consciousness in our life as it is, elevating our level of being and guiding and infusing matter with spiritual values, with just another pure breath, just being in the moment. And it requires consistency, a kind of gentle persistence that is energetic, psychological, personal, intimate work. And that's what this school and this group is here for. Again, as shared last time, one of our teachers, Rafael Vargas, says that if one pays attention to the body of the Gnostic doctrine, one discovers that everything revolves around the practical idea of the awakening of consciousness. And so we are very interested in bringing into our material life, into our daily life, a more awake, present, free, not trapped by so many conditions, and directed or intentional from the perspective of the consciousness, that awareness that is awake, free, and directed. That is what we're interested in. So we'll take a very brief break, a few minutes if you can, just to stretch, get a sip, take care of yourself, and then come back for practice. Okay, so let's find a position for the body that we can stay relatively still in, and let's let go as much as we can of any distractions in our environment. I know in these times, in this way, I mean, thank you all from joining from wherever you are and being here. And let's give thanks to whoever maybe in our homes or our environment, and they're trying to let us have this space and time. And so it's a big community effort to be together like this. And I know that I have the benefit of having the energy of talking, and for you to sustain your energy of listening. We appreciate and we recognize what that takes. So thanks for being here. And so let's find a position for the body that we can remain relatively still to let our consciousness settle and have some quiet, have some space. And maybe you don't have total control over the sounds in your environment, and we can let it all be okay without tension, because first and foremost, we want to become very relaxed. So we're going to have these next 15 minutes in meditation practice, and you can have your eyes closed, or you can leave them lightly open and gazing at a non-distracting spot before you. Either way is fine, whatever is more conducive to you to stay present. And you want to connect well with your breathing, and let your breathing become nice and long down the full torso of your body, as if you can breathe through the whole trunk of your body down to the reaches of your lungs. And let the exhales be long and smooth and slow, getting to the very end of each exhale. So let yourself take in these nice long breaths, long inhales, long exhales. And as you do this, allow yourself to relax. Let go of any unnecessary tension in the face. Maybe shift your neck side to side, letting go of any tension in the neck. Maybe gently rolling your shoulders up and back, letting go of any tension in the shoulders and the arms, the abdomen, the back, the legs, the feet. This is the first, for some little, for some major, the first act of trust in meditation is to relax. To trust that you're held in this moment and in this environment, that you don't need that self-protective tension right now, and that you can relax as much as you can, as much as you're willing in this moment. And that you can breathe nice, long inhales, complete long exhales. In the little 20-second practice we did earlier of just being in the moment, I cheated a little and I counted. I used counting to keep my mind more present. So you can do that now. If the mind is tending to wander away or think or remember or futurize, count the end of each long inhale as 1, and then the end of the exhale is 2, and the end of the next inhale is 3, and so on, as you just bring yourself present and you relax. And now breathe as though you breathe directly into your heart. If that seems elusive to you or too strange, you can just breathe as if directly into the center of your chest, this area of the Anahata chakra. And the sound that particularly puts us in contact with the heart and the chakra, the energy center related with the heart, is the sound O, well expressed in the mantra Om, considered the seed sound of the universe. Om, in which there is everything in unity. So let's, if you're willing and able, sing the sound of the Om or just listen to my voice, Om, 3 times as you breathe into your heart or the center of your chest, being present there. And as you continue to breathe into your heart or the center of your chest, imagine your heart or this heart center as that point of connection between the line of spirit, the line of who, of the human, the line of the being, that vertical line, and that horizontal line of life and matter and time. And there is nothing wrong with the line of life, matter, and time. We simply want to lead it, infuse it, inform it with that vertical line of the being, to make it an intelligent life, a wise life, a generous life, an elevated life, an honest life, a life that Diogenes Laertiad could look at and he could say, ah, someone who's becoming honest. And that lantern and that center point is your heart. And you are always at that cross point to be a human, a humanus, a spirit-led mind. Be a human in this moment. Be human. Let yourself feel that inpouring of spirit and be that soul that completes him. Just by being here. Meanwhile, be the witness of your mind, of your body. Not a critic, just a witness. And now let's come back to a couple of nice, long, slow breaths, aware of our body, aware of our breathing, aware of being in this group meditating together right now. And let's keep in our hearts what we have seen, what we have learned, what we have experienced, what we are taking away from this time together. Let that stay in your heart and inform you, infuse you as you live the rest of your day.